Easy E, how are we?
Shawnee,
Uh-oh.
apparently it's been a long time coming, but there's a lot wrong with me.
Before you go any further, right, it has taken officially, as of recording right now, our 200th episode of the Any Given Monday podcast. And you finally admitted on episode 200 that there's a lot wrong with you. Eric, what is wrong with you? I'm afraid to actually ask. No, I've asked the question. I've asked the question. And I apologize in
Well,
advance for the answer.
look, I'm not at home, so the NCT is not an issue anymore. But I thought, do you know what? It's probably worth getting my own NCT. So I booked a physio. And it was the most bizarre experience because I went in and he was like, "Oh, so what's your main issue?" And I was like, I don't have one yet, but I feel like there's one coming. And
Wait.
so,
You booked a physio without having an
yeah,
issue to book it. So you basically went looking for a problem.
I went because I know one's coming. And I just know, I know that there's a lot that's not just right at the minute. But anyway, needless to say, within about, I'd say 2 minutes, there was a lot of problems.
You keep looking and looking and looking for problems, you're bound to find them.
Oh no, these weren't hiding.
Well, it wasn't hard to find, was it? What's going on?
Like everything from my neck, from compensating from wearing the helmets when I'm flying, was causing me to compensate. My hip was an inch higher on, or half an inch higher on one side, which was causing this problems on the exterior. This, and he was like, "I can't fix all this today. Let's focus on the main muscle groups. Instability in the core, instability in the ankles. The length.
How's he finding that instability in core and the ankles?
I
Was
was
he
doing
doing
little
planks
tests.
and stuff, or are you just doing takes?
Lift your leg, hold it this way, tilt it this way, and then twist this way. Like I couldn't put myself back in the positions he put me in, and then it was like, no, hold that, and my leg would just go boom, and he'd be
Okay.
like, okay, we need to work on this, we need to work on that. But basically, he stretched me in a certain direction. He was like, put your hand on the muscle. It was like hitting a brick. He was like, this should not be like this. I was like, okay. Now you're as good as going to the dentist, always full of bad news.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so it's it was refreshing. So I got a body manipulated and realigned and cracked this way and that way and released in the neck. And I have to say, I've never felt this before, but when he released something in my neck, I actually nearly fainted. I got
Well,
a rush to the head. I can't describe it, but I got the cold sweats and I was like, whoa, buddy, time out. And he was like, I'm not surprised, but you're okay. Relax, give me water. And he was like, I didn't think it'd be that bad, but obviously it is. But yeah, something that was just not right in my neck. And then all of a sudden there was blood flowing again to places that hasn't flown in a while.
did
And
he say what happened? Like, did he say why the reason was, or he's like, "Ah, don't worry
I
about
know,
it."
not to be bad, but he did say it to me, and I was that woozy. Didn't hear it, but it was something he released somewhere there that was linked to something else. Anyway, I was holding on to the table for dear life. But what is good about it and what is reassuring about it is that I have learned some things about where I'm weak. Because a lot of what we talk about is we usually get injured and then go and fix it.
Hmm.
And we talk about injury prevention and we talk about all this. And I knew I was up in the load and it was a heavy year of 16 weeks to an Ironman, all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, I can't have gotten away with this clean. There was an element of me that was like, I know that there's something coming if I don't start to do this right. And that's what this year is all about. So it was a good session. It was a really, really good session and cupping and red light and heats and massage guns and stretches and
How long
uh,
was the session? He got a lot
an hour and a
done.
half. Yeah, it
An
was an hour and a
hour
half.
and a half with a physio of just kicking
Yeah,
the crap out of you
manipulating.
with every single bit of equipment he could find.
Yeah, and cracking this and moving me that way and then realigning me and saying like it was crazy to see the difference in my hip after we'd done a bit of release, a bit
Is
of
he a
muscle work.
physio or a chiropractor or is it a
Oh,
combination or
physio, yeah, yeah, no, he is a physio. But yeah, look. he kicked the crap out of me anyway, but he was really small. So I was like, how is he going to crack my back? And he was like, just keep leaning back, just keep leaning back. Before I know it, I'm at a 45-degree angle, getting my back cracked in every different way. I have to say, it's something he said to me. It was like, look, I think you've done the right thing. People usually wait till the problem is there. You're getting ahead of it. He said, you're fine, you're fit, you could run, you can do this, but at some point, one of these things is going to just cause the problem, and then you're going to be out injured. Whereas now he's like, I've no problem with you going training tomorrow, but we need to work on this, 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 and this. And it's going to take a little bit of time. And then I'm going to be in a good position, and I've learned. So that was my experience. So there's a lot wrong with me. And now I haven't even talked about the mental part.
Please don't. By this, and this, is that stuff now outside of him, or do you have to go back in and get more manipulation, for a lack of a better word now? What's going on?
He told me the issues, and he didn't waste his time saying, show me how you do a sit-up. It was
you work on ankle stability.
I need to work on my stability. I have a weak lower abs. He said my upper abs really strong, lower abs really weak. I've weak on the outside, that like my core muscles are really, really strong. Connective smaller muscles really, really weak in a lot of places. So I need to work on a lot of functional stuff, and which I probably knew. So yeah, it's all those things. And he didn't waste my time. He said, look, let's just assess today, release what I can. And he started with my neck, and I've started being able to crack my neck, which I haven't ever been able to do. And since he's worked on it, I can't crack my neck anymore. So I've obviously been carrying something. So yeah, it was really interesting, really insightful. But again, it's about the patience. It's about, this is a goal for a lifestyle, and part of that has to focus on my recovery. If I want to do this without being sore or picking up injuries, part of me needs to focus on the recovery element. And sometimes the massage gun and the foam roller can only do so much. And I was starting to notice that because of back lifting heavy again, running fast, stuff I haven't done in a while. I was like, do you know what? This is the time. I'm going for the NCT.
Good to hear. Good to hear. At least you're back on track with it now, anyway, and building towards whatever the next challenge would be, and a stronger you towards it. I'm officially signed up for my next challenge on April 6th with Elevation. So that this is the first backyard ultra. This will be the first attempt to get the 100 miles in 24 hours. I put a post on it there.
Are you saying
no? So I put up the post on it. I will more than likely. Here's what's going to happen. And I was saying to Neve, and Neve's coming down with me for the weekend, and she learned from you last year in terms of nutrition and everything else. So she's coming with me for it. I was saying to her, I was like, look, I'm gonna go for the first 12 hours. If I feel good after 12 hours, I might just leave it and then work towards the next backyard ultra in May, and be smart about it, and then have a good 12-hour training block and go from there. And she's like, Sean, there's not a thing smart about you. She didn't quite put it that way, but she said, we both know, well, if you're feeling good after 12 hours and look around the field and you think 24 is on, you're going 24. And I'm like, yeah, if I think 24 is on, I'm going 24. If I start feeling niggles and pain and stuff after 12 hours, I might be smart enough to say, you know what, I've Monday booked off. Let's just enjoy the rest of the weekend, and that would be that. But if I feel like it's on, and the scary thing is about it, we were just talking to our guest after we finished recording this week's episode of the podcast, and I was talking to him about it, and I remember the start of lap 15, right when I sat down before it, and my mind was ready to go all night. Like, I was feeling great, everything was good, and as soon as I got up off that chair, I was like, it's done. It's what's going on. Everything just seized up completely. But before I sat down in that chair, I felt like I was good to go comfortably for another 3-4 hours. I did, like, I was doing other issues with the light and the torch and all the rest, but I felt like I was ready to keep going, and everything just seized. So that could happen again. I could feel great at hour 12, and hour 13, I'm gone. I'm gonna work a lot more on my endurance with strength endurance, and definitely mileage. I have a few different ideas for mileage and getting that back up again. I think I'm at a better spot at the moment, because this time last year I hadn't got a 50k like I had during the deal on my belt. But look, we'll see. Anything can happen. I just gotta try and maybe book myself for an NCT because there are little niggles already. Not you're going to be 100% injury preventive, but yeah, they're there. They're there.
Not to say there's no point going for an NCT if you're going to redline it with 24 hours in 3 weeks time. So, yeah, no, look, all I would say is just remember the goal. The goal is May. So, it's to be enjoyed and to build and to be patient. But look, you're stubborn enough. This is the problem. This is the problem with
Yeah.
those two. You are stubborn, but I suppose this time you're going in with your eyes a bit more open to it. There are going to be other people who are going to take on this event. Sean is going to be there. I'm sure he'll want to talk to everyone. He loves when people touch his shoulders as well. So when you're on the lap, make sure to grab him by the shoulders.
Do not do that.
It's a great event. Anyone who hasn't thought about signing up, do go for a couple of hours. Have a look at what a backyard ultra is. It's different. It is very different. It's a different pace and it's a long game. But for even a couple of hours, it's going to be good, and you're going to hopefully see Sean have a good 12, and then whatever happens after that as well.
Like I said in the post, I think it's a great one for just trying to get your first half marathon, your first full marathon, and the experience. And what I've heard every time I tell people about it that are in this game, they're like, "Oh, PJ and all the lads down there, they will put on an event, they will put on a show." So I'm very interested to see what they mean by that for this one. But right before we get into this week's guest of the podcast, you had a great little T-shirt slogan, and I'm hoping by saying it out loud, we're not going to lose the copyright to it. You're like, during this podcast, at some stage, you just said, we're just two lads that just show up and don't give up. And that sums up that stubbornness. I'm like, that's actually very true. But this is a very good episode for probably not just showing up and don't give up. It's just getting your shit together. And we get into a lot of talk about, aerobic running and lactate testing. And even though it sounds very scientific stuff, the way this is broke down is very, very informative and a great listen, I think.
Yeah, this is a great episode. This is where the sciences matter. You're getting your exposure again to elite athletes. What is the science behind the elites, and what they're doing, and how it can always be related back to us who show up and never give up and just want to participate in this sport long term, and how to set goals and how to be realistic with yourself. It has everything in it. It's a really good listen. And yeah, I think we've talked enough. I think I've still got some problems to sort out. So it's time to let everyone listen to this week's episode of the Any Given Run Day podcast.
Let's go. So this week on the Any Given Run Day podcast, we have the coach behind Perfect Pacing, as well as the distance running coach at UCD Athletics Club, senior club coach at Kilcoole AC, a coach educator with Athletics Ireland, and a personal coach to many Irish international athletes. Anything else, Emmett Dunleavy? Welcome to this week's episode of the Any Given Run Day podcast. That is an absolute mouthful. Where do you find the time, sir?
Yeah, sometimes I don't know.
Emma, do you cook your own dinner? This is
I do. I do it weekends, but not during the week.
You don't have a CV like that and cook your own meals.
I cook on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. That's the agreement. And Jill does. My wife is very supportive, as you'd probably expect, given all the stuff you just outlined. So I'm out coaching Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and Saturday morning. So she looks after the meals in that space.
Not only do you have that resume, you somehow to find time to coach abroad as well. Like you were in Kenya at the start of the year, I want to say, doing altitude training. How was that?
Yeah, so Kenya's somewhere I've gone, actually, that was my 8th time over there. I've gone there since 2000, and I think it was 2009 or 2010 was the first time I was over there. So when I was training at a high level myself, I used to go there pretty regularly, and like to get that boost of altitude. And a lot of the guys that have been coaching, I suppose I encouraged them to go there about 4 years ago, the first time. Derek McElhenney and Keelan Cadrell and those guys, they went, they loved it. And basically we've made it kind of a staple part of the year now, is in January every year, or just at the end of December, we try and get a group to go over. And we've had a really good group there the last 2 or 3 years. This year we had nearly 16 athletes in total. I didn't coach all of them. Some of them were guys who heard that we were going over. They're also operating at a high level. And we had a great camp over there. Some of them guys, most of them waited for sort of between 3 and 4 weeks, because you need that duration up there to get the full benefit of the altitude. But it's a brilliant place. If you ever get a chance, if you're into your running, it's like a mecca for distance runners. It's just, it's perfect. There's perfect for training and just a great environment to be in.
What is day one like getting used to? Like, what you had on a post, like 2,400 meters up, like does that hit you straight away? Do you feel like you're much slower in the breathing and just feel like you're starting from scratch, or what is that like?
Yeah, so I guess as runners, any of us who train a couple of times a week, we're quite fit versus the general population. You walk up a flight of stairs and, if you're walking beside somebody who doesn't run, they're a little bit out of breath and you're fine. You go to Kenya on day one and you're really breathing deep at the top of the first flight of stairs. You're just like, you're literally back to square one. And it takes probably about 10 days to fully acclimatize to the altitude. Sorry, not even to initially acclimatize. It takes you a full 3 to 4 weeks to really get back to paces and heart rates that you'd see at sea level. And in reality, sea level athletes will never match their paces and heart rates at altitude that say the Kenyans who were born and live up there. So you're always kind of a step below, but it's just that your body acclimatizes over the space of that 3 or 4 weeks. And then when you come back down, I mean, you feel like you could run without breathing for the first couple of days. When you come back down, the benefit is just brilliant, provided you get it right up there.
How long does that last? I'm trying to justify going to Kenya for a couple of weeks before doing it.
Looking at flights to Kenya as we speak. I need to get
must be closer than I am.
How long do you want it to last? I can answer this question any way you want. The science would say that you get a lot of the new red blood cells that you generate would last up to 6 weeks. But in reality, if you go there and you're getting fitter and you've moved your fitness to a higher level, I mean, that lasts with you indefinitely. Very often we find athletes will go up there, they'll do a really good block of training, and aerobically they've just improved. So like your VO2 max improves, your thresholds improve. That doesn't go away. But like that initial kick probably lasts about 4 to 6 weeks, and then, like I said, a lot of the fitness benefits will last indefinitely. But like, say the top guys like in our group, and to be honest, at the very top level internationally, pretty much all distance athletes are going to altitude at least 3, if not 4 times a year. So like they're probably spending 3 to 4 months of the year up there. So I mean, that tells you all you need to know in terms of the benefits of it.
Like, I'm sure there's places in Ireland, so I don't want to badmouth or anything like that, but that have like their chambers for like kind of mimicking this, but like a one-off thing. Or it used to be a phase where you had, I like remember the Rocky movies, the Creed one, they had the mask and stuff. That seems to have gone now. The mask for, I think, was to mimic kind of altitude training. I could be wrong on that, or mimic harder breathing. Like, does that work at all, or is the reason that mask is gone, or like you need to be in that same spot for 3 weeks to get benefits?
So there's still people that would use the altitude tents, and there in some places there's altitude houses. So I know there was one in Limerick in UL for quite a few years. Colin Griffin was behind that. So basically that was the house was fully sealed up, and they just altered the oxygen levels in the house to mimic 2,500 meters above sea level. So that is quite good. And likewise, the altitude tent is something you kind of goes around your bed and you sleep in that for 8 or 9 hours at night. But the big advantage you have at altitude, it's not necessarily the training there, it's the fact you're in that environment for 24 hours a day. Whereas if you're in an altitude house or in your tent, you're doing well to get 10 or 12 hours. So even with best efforts, you're only getting half the exposure that you would when you're actually at altitude. So I actually had one of the tents for a couple of years. And yeah, there is a bit of a kick off it, but it's absolutely not comparable to what you get by actually going to altitude.
Remind me never to go camping with you, Emmett.
It was known as the passion killer.
Difference between Limerick and Kenya.
Significant is the answer. I lived in London for a while in Teddington, and there was a house where there was actually just a lot of athletes. We lived in Teddington, and if you've ever been to Teddington, it's like the place where most of the international athletes would base themselves when they're in the UK or in Europe. So like it was like the who's who of world athletics. But the house we were in was quite big. There was 4 altitude tents in it. Each tent had a generator. It was humming like an airport every night around 8 o'clock to get the altitude. The noise, because everyone who didn't have one had to wear earplugs because of the 4 lads that had altitude tents and that had the generators out in the hall.
It's amazing to see the science that's going into the runs that you're getting. Like you're saying, the top athletes. And I follow a lot of the triathletes as well. They're all going to these training camps up in the Alps. And they're living there. Essentially, they're packing the van. They're gone for 6 weeks. Big training block leading into races. How important, particularly with you, scheduling, coaching, how important is getting the balance right? How do you maximize that? I know you've said the fitness lasts, but how do you maximize that to get the advantage? Because that's why we do this. That's why me and Sean are going to Kenya with you next January, is to get the advantage. But how do you manage that, and yeah, I suppose that is the question. How do you manage that? How do you factor that into a race season?
Yeah, so I guess ultimately when you're planning out a season, particularly for high end athletes, you're looking first of all is pick your target race. Okay, so that might be World Championships, European Championships, and then you work back from there. Ideally, I would get most athletes to come down from altitude a minimum of 2 weeks, but ideally maybe 3 to 4 weeks before their target race. And then you're working back from that. So if you want to do a 4 week camp, obviously that's got to start 8 to 9 weeks before that target race. The key with altitude is you're getting most of the benefit from just being there. But when you're in an environment where you're surrounded by top class athletes, everybody has nothing to do except train. It's very easy to get carried away and do too much. And that's where I suppose as a coach, I try and get myself to Kenya for the first 2 weeks of the camp, monitor everything in terms of taking heart rates and lactates. So like at the end of the first week, we all went to the track. We done like 5x2K or 6x2K, and I was taking lactates. And basically you're calibrating your training paces off that for the next couple of weeks. And the main reason we do that is because it's so different to sea level. Like you're probably running 30 seconds per mile. So that's what, 20 seconds per kilometer slower at altitude than you would at sea level. And if you're missing your times, or if you're out by 30 seconds per mile, the stimulus you're getting from your workouts is completely different. So it's really important to recalibrate things up there. And I think then it's a case of, you do your training, the paces are different. The stimulus is the same in terms of, your heart rates and stuff are the same, but the pace you're running at is quite different. And then if you get all that right, then that's when you get the benefits when you come back to sea level. But if you overcook it at altitude, which is really easy to do, that has massive negative consequences when you come back down.
One of the things that...
Sorry, Sean, I'm going to continue on this one. We've all become kind of heart rate monitor focused. Like I forgot mine for training tonight and I was absolutely disgusted with myself.
Hardly worth going.
My Strava is not going to recognize how fit I've gotten. But we're looking at metrics and you are looking at metrics in like the minute detail, and we're going to open the can of worms. So for me, I've seen on Instagram people getting their ears pricked and someone telling them you're doing great. Yeah. That is the lactate testing you're on about, isn't it? Just for some people who have never seen it or heard of it.
Yeah, so I mean, if you have, for people, some people might be familiar with it, but I mean, you can go to a lab. There's loads of places where loads of labs and universities and stuff that offer testing. So you go in, you do stuff. It might be a session like 6x4 minutes, and each of those 4-minute intervals is a little bit quicker. After each interval, you take a lactate from the finger or from the earlobe, which basically measures the lactate concentration in the blood, and then you're tracking the pace and heart rate. And if you've ever seen a lactate graph, it's kind of flat in the early stages, then you get a gradual rise up, and then you get a huge big kick towards the end. And what you're looking for is those changes in lactates. What's the pace where that's occurring, and what's the heart rate where that's occurring? So that's where I suppose the basis comes from in terms of lactate testing. But the last couple of years, because of the small little analyzers, they're portable. I mean, I've got 2 of them. I pretty much bring them to training every Tuesday night, and I'd always bring them, like, say, if you're going on an altitude camp. So we have a good idea where the lads and girls, where their lactate should be for a given workout. And basically, I'm just double checking that with the monitors. So let's say that 5x2K session, we were trying to target 2 to 2.5 millimolar lactate. Basically, I was taking a lactate after maybe 2 or 3 reps, seeing was it in that zone, and usually it's a case of either speed up or slow down. It's rarely a case of speed up; it's usually a case of slow down, because most of us tend to overcook it. And like the lads would say, they would call them the speed guns, because I'd say 90% of the time you take a lactate, it's on the fast side, and you've got to just dial it back a little bit. And very often it feels easy, but it's the physiological stimulus that you're actually looking for that needs to be specific.
You had a video on Instagram. You were doing it with David Gillick on the lactate test, and it was mad because you're able to show from that curve, the early stages of it, that he was more primed for a fast 5K than he was for a longer marathon, which was supposed to be later on in the year. How?
And if you wouldn't mind, I've just got my crayons out here, just slowly.
So you can tell, I suppose, from even when you're at very easy running pace, you can tell how high or low the lactate is, whether somebody's very well aerobically conditioned or whether they're beginning to come maybe towards it. They're more oriented towards the shorter, faster stuff. So to give you an idea, if you guys went out jogging, right, and if you're in good marathon shape, we would expect your lactate at jogging pace and sub-marathon pace to be like, 1 or 1.5 millimole, right? If you went then and you started doing a track season and you're doing a lot of fast sort of 5K reps, 1500 meter pace stuff, your okay, you're turning on that anaerobic system, but in order to do that, there's that push-pull effect between that and the aerobic system. So your aerobic begins to erode, even though you're getting sharper and you're getting more race specific. And that's where the idea of a peak comes into it. In that when an athlete comes into the summer, they're trying to minimize the amount of aerobic fitness they're losing and at the same time get the race specific stuff right. And that's always the challenge for middle distance runners. It's probably less of an issue for marathon runners because their event is 99% aerobic. But I guess from the test you're probably referring to with David, we knew that when he was doing 5K and 10K stuff, his base was beginning to disappear a little bit. And therefore we had to start swinging back towards the general fitness stuff. And I guess for someone like David, I mean, he came from obviously he was a world finalist over 400 meters. His tendency to lose his fitness from doing speed work is a lot higher than an out and out marathon run. So yeah, it was a good, and it's just like, it is just another tool in terms of monitoring things. It's not magic. It doesn't make you faster, but it just means that you're dialing in the specifics a little bit more and you're getting a bit more bang from your buck out of training then.
I never thought I'd have so much in common with Mr. Gillick, but yeah.
That's a whole new podcast.
Hold on, wait, it worked for you, Gillick, if you're listening, €1 million, or get yourself onto the podcast.
Or next Thursday.
There we go. Do you use VO2? I suppose when people talk about testing and stuff like that, the one that might come to people's mind first is VO2 max. But you would use more lactate in terms of finding training zones, and how much emphasis do you put on a VO2 max testing?
Very little, to be honest. It's not that we don't do it. So sometimes when the athletes go into the lab, especially if they're in, some of the guys are carded with Sport Ireland, so they'll get that full battery of tests maybe once or twice a year. I'll get them to put on the mask and get the VO2. They absolutely hate it because the mask is really uncomfortable. But I mean, I would see VO2 max as it's a nice to know number, but it's not nearly as specific as the lactates. The lactates give you those training zones and you can see those changing over time. And I suppose to give you an example of that, the one that we'd often use is Paula Radcliffe had a VO2 max of around about 70 when she was 19 and she won the World Junior Cross Country. When she was, I think, in her late 20s or 30, she broke the marathon world record. Her VO2 max was actually the same, but with that 70-71. But what had changed in those intervening years is her thresholds. Her thresholds had significantly improved. So VO2 max is like the size of the engine. Which is nice to know that if you've got a 2-litre engine or a 3-litre engine, but the thresholds give you all that fine tuning and they dial in the specifics an awful lot more. So like I'd say if you're thinking of getting some physiological testing done, absolutely knock yourself out, get the VO2 done as well, but make sure it's done with lactates because that gives you so much more information and a lot more specifics on it.
So what you're saying is if someone goes for a run and afterwards they check their Garmin and it's completely inaccurate and it goes down a point on VO2 max, not to worry about it too much.
I wouldn't get too concerned with anything Garmin tells you other than how long you've been running and how far you've been running.
This is something that 39.
What?
Mine's about 39. Thank God for that.
It's useless.
Like the trends on it can be right. As in, if your VO2 max is going up over a couple of weeks and months, then you're probably going the right direction. But I wouldn't put too much faith or emphasis on the algorithms on the watch. They're nice to look at, but yeah, rarely accurate, and especially for more experienced athletes, like you wouldn't put any faith in them at all.
When you go,
I don't know if that's news or bad news for you lads, but that's.
Oh no, it's great news. Fat Eric is loving this. So when you go to these camps, obviously you were competitive in your own field. You is it hard to not get involved and to stay as the coach, or do you get involved?
Yeah, I still run with them. So on their easy days, I'd still train with the guys, and at stages where I'm fit, I'd probably jump into workouts with some of the lads. But I'm at the stage now where I'm pacing most of the girls in the group. So I actually paced the Seville Marathon for one of them there 2 weeks ago. We were over in Seville. We had a group of 6 or 7 over there, and I've done a lot of the sessions. Like I done all the long runs with them. In order to pace a marathon, you've got to be reasonably fit. So so I jump into a lot of the long runs, and actually, I find it really enjoyable. And especially if you go out on long runs with the group, as a coach, you're picking up bits and pieces. If you're running along somebody for 20 miles, there's inevitably a good bit of chat and banter. As a coach, you're still picking up little bits of information along the way. So I find any days I can run with them, I do. Because, getting that one-to-one time with an athlete at a high level can be tricky. I mean, we're all busy. So if you can carve out an hour or 2 hours somewhere along the way and get for a run with them, you know yourself, people start chatting and you're picking up bits of information all the time.
just to clarify for people listening, by pacing, you were casually doing a 2:26 or something. Is that, David?
It was not casual.
Like, just to clarify that one, because the way you're like, I've dropped back to pacing now. I'm like, insane.
If you've seen the Strava graph, Sean, it was not casual. It went very well for 19 and a half miles, and then it went south very fast. Yeah, so I brought Emery. Emery McGlynn was looking for Olympic qualification. So I said I'd pace her to sort of 19, 20 miles. And yeah, I ran on for one more mile. And I thought, this is grand. You know what? I'll finish this out. And then logistically, it was easier to run the rest of it to get to the finish line. Well, my legs absolutely went to pieces at the end of it. Like I went from sub 2:30 pace to outside 3:30 pace over the last 4 miles. That'll give you an idea of how it went in the latter stages.
Wow.
Jeez, that's a big change for you.
Yeah. But no, it was good. It was good. Like it was great to be able to, like, Anne-Marie, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but I mean, Anne-Marie turned 44 last week and she was having a shot at the Olympic Games. Like it's amazing to be in your 40s at a stage where most people's lives have moved on well past elite sport, and she's still got a real hunger for that hard work. And she did miss out. I mean, it's not going to happen for her now. Yeah. Yeah, when it's something that she can be very proud of in terms of the last couple of weeks.
I think you had in the blog post that you say you peak for endurance athletes at 30, 35. Am I right in saying that? Early 30s or something for endurance. The fact she's a little bit beyond that and still trying to getting very close to applying for the Olympics is pretty cool. Yeah.
You find with a lot of athletes who are good into their late 30s and early 40s, they've missed a period of time at some stage in their career. So I have a couple of athletes. Brian Maher is another guy Brian is still running like 14:40 and he's 47 years of age. He's running 14:40 for 5K. But I suppose with Brian and Anne-Marie, like Brian only came to the sport when he was about 26, 27. Anne-Marie would have taken, I think, 7 or 8 years out of the sport in her 20s. And you find that people who are good in their 40s tend to have had a late start, or they haven't been around for a period of the middle part of their career, and they have those years to use when you get a little bit older. It's still hard. I mean, you still got a lot to balance, and probably even more to balance when you get into your 40s. But yeah, it's just like in terms of when athletes peak, it's getting younger, because like even in terms of moving to the marathon, the standards are going so high. People are moving to the marathon earlier. Like there's an awful lot of guys in their mid-20s are moving to the marathon, whereas traditionally it was kind of seen as something where you go when you turn 30, but it's now so fast. People are going there earlier.
Is that the gap there before going a little bit later in the training? Is that because they're not putting the pounding on the body, that it's not as beat up, or is there now later they're doing more kind of smarter with the training, bringing in strength and conditioning kind of work and stuff as well? Why is that for some people, that gap, and then coming in later and they're peaking in their 40s, or is it just a lot of it down to genetics in terms of getting closer to those times?
Yeah, so I guess genetics play a huge part in our sport. Like you can have the best coach in the world, the best scientific backup, but like training will never put in what God has left out. Somebody said to me one time, like you're dealt a hand and you've got to play that hand as best you can. So like some of us will train at a really high level, be super specific, and it might be a case of breaking 3 hours for the marathon. And you could work really hard to get there. And that's your Olympic Games. Other people will be 2.5 hours. And then the very elite guys they're genetically, they're freaks. You know, you might need 20 different characteristics to be an elite athlete. You need all 20 if you're going to go to the Olympic Games. You know, whereas most of us are somewhere between 20 and 0.
And down the bottom end of that scale, anyway.
But like, you can't downplay how much genetics, how much that actually plays into it. It's huge.
So when you're coaching someone and someone gets on, they've got that unrealistic goal with you, because you've coached people to 220 or 220 odd and everything else, and you've a lot of great achievements as a coach. Someone like myself, Eric, is like, yeah, no, I want that 220. How tough is that conversation? Has that happened before? You're like, it's genetics, it's not happening, or what happens there?
Well, like it's genetics, like they're a limiting factor at some point, but like you don't know where that point is until you've done a lot of years of very consistent, very smart training. And the very first guy I started coaching, a guy called Bobby Murphy, sat beside me in Bank of Ireland when I was working there. Bobby ran 3:13 for the marathon back in 2011, I think it was. Bobby's ran 2:22 flat for the marathon since then, and that was 9 years later. So that gives you an idea. Like he said to me after he ran the 3:13, I want to give this a proper go. So he came back we went back to 1500s. So done 1500s on the track, 3Ks, 5Ks, and gradually moved back up to the marathon. So like if you were to take Bobby in 2011 and say, right, well, what could you run? You might say breaking 3 hours would be a good goal. But over time, you just keep stacking year on top of year, and you don't know where that limit actually is. So like with any athlete, I'd say, right, where are you now? Are we going, and are you going to be better in 6 months and 12 months, and then reassess the whole thing in 12 months time, and then try and improve again? And if they're hungry for the work and they're motivated and they're consistent with their training, like I said, you don't know where that's going to stop eventually. And like for an awful lot of athletes a load of athletes I work with, it's me trying to stop them getting in their own way a lot of the time. It like ultimately I'm just trying to unveil their ability. Athletes have a great ethic for hard work. They love pushing hard, and a lot of the time my job is just to pull them back and allow them to stay consistent, not get injured, don't get sick, and then be patient over time and see where you can get to.
It sounds like you have, and even look at some of your training programs, no stone unturned and stuff like that. You seem to be a big fan of periodization in terms of like when you build up to a marathon and you build towards your PB time. Okay, now it's time to go back faster and back down to 5Ks and stuff and build back up again that way. And I suppose the race series and stuff like that. Would that be fair to say? And
yeah. And actually, this is the conversation I had with a girl this morning, and this is almost the exact same question. It's like you're looking for different stimuluses throughout the year. Like some people will go and they do half marathons and marathons all year round, but that training stimulus is constantly the same the whole way through the year. Whereas if you're periodizing it, you're doing your marathon stuff for a sort of 10, 12 week block, then dial things right back, go back to 5K, cross country, 10K for a while. And it's that constant stack and different stimuluses on top of each other. That's where you trigger, you're trying to trick the body into getting fitter and getting faster. And yeah, it's important that you're doing different stuff at different times of the year.
What's the main? Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, when you see the likes of us Egypts that go and I'm going to do 4 marathons in 4 weeks, and how does that?
This is usually my reaction.
Don't listen to the podcast for the last.
Send 3 entries and we'll have a chat then.
Well, let's say we have taken a lot, and it's one thing we always say about the podcast: we front row seats to great minds in sport and great ideas, and everyone has different tweak and a different mentality and philosophy about sport and training. We have started to change our philosophy in the patience game, and that's been something that you seem to express quite a lot, that it is a patient game. You've described from 2011 to the 222 marathon. How patient is patient? Like what's a realistic outcome for someone who has done a marathon or a couple and is saying, okay, maybe could I do a 3 hour in 2 years? What's the fine line? Obviously you have to see how they go over 12 months, but can you make that realistic assessment after 12 to say, okay, we can push, or they're stubborn enough that we can push a little bit more? Or how do you combat the people like me and Sean that just show up and don't give up? How do you get us to that 3 hour marathon?
Well, that's where I guess the periodization comes in there, is that let's say you run your marathon. Let's say, for example, you run 3:15, 3:10, and you're thinking, right, how am I going to bridge that gap up to 3 hours? It's a case of going back and trying to get your 5Ks and 10K times down to a level that are equivalent to the 3 hour marathon. Okay, so I use the online pace calculators quite a bit. So, let's say you're somebody who's trying to break 3. You want to be running close to 18 and a half minutes for 5K. You probably want to be around 38:30 for 10K. You probably want to be around the 124 for a half marathon. Like if you're not hitting those benchmarks over the shorter stuff, it's going to be very difficult to go sub 3 over the marathon. So in that situation, or whatever those equivalents are for, if it's the 3:30 or if it's 4 hours, whatever it might be. So the thing is, after a marathon, you go back, let's try and get the 5K down a little bit closer to 18:30. And those shorter distance races, I always think they're good benchmarks in terms of how much progress you're making. And then when you're bringing that new speed up to the marathon, you're trying to unlock the next 5 or 10 minutes to get you a little bit closer to your goal. And then the physiological testing is another layer on top of that again, is that you can dial in the specifics a little bit more during those training blocks. But like physiological testing, like it's good to have. It's not absolutely essential. I think if you're being sensible with your training paces and just being realistic in terms of where you train to where you are right now, as opposed to where you want to be in 6 months' time. And if you're doing that consistently, that's going to get you places that you never thought were possible.
It's that one step in front of the other technique that don't work.
It is, yeah. And like I'd never limit an athlete saying, your upper limit is X, Y, or Z. you just don't know if they get 2, 3, or 4 years of training back to back, where athletes could get to.
And obviously age being a factor, a lot of people only get into endurance, and a lot of people say, oh, I couldn't do that. Sure, I'm in my 30s now. A lot of people only really get into endurance in their 30s, or family life has changed their kind of attitude to the long run, gives them time away from home.
Exactly.
But like for people, we've had guests on this podcast who took up running at 30, at 31, and are now hunting sub 2:30 marathons and stuff. So what is your advice for people who are looking to ground zero? They've had a good foundation in sport, maybe in younger ages, but they're looking to take on the new challenge that is the endurance game, running triathlon, whatever it is they're choosing as their poison. What's your advice for people who are listening? Because a lot of our demographic are between that 25 and 45. What's your advice for those who are looking to start that journey, I suppose?
I guess the first thing is get some good advice, and that will usually entail joining a club. If you've got a club or a group that's close by that you can link in with, it makes everything so much easier. You'll pick up an awful lot of knowledge of other runners or other triathletes that you're just spending time with that training, and you're constantly picking up information, because like when any bunch of runners to get together, the conversation inevitably turns to training and ways of getting faster. So you're always picking stuff up from other athletes. And the other side of it with a club is that great social element to it, is that it makes the miles go so much quicker when you're with a group of people. So I mean, if you're looking to bridge that gap, I think have a look around, get a club that's close to you, and make sure you're getting good guidance. And then, for some people, as they move on, they might, maybe the club thing isn't specific for them, or is it just not suitable, but think about getting a coach, because having somebody to guide you can avoid you making an awful lot of the very obvious mistakes that we've all run into over time. So get somebody that's made the mistakes before and let them, fast track your progress over time.
You've been coaching now for 10 years, and you've obviously been at a high level for about 20 years before that. What has changed in coaching, particularly in the last 10 years, or like what was the go-to advice maybe 10 years ago that it isn't now? Like you're seeing online, there's a lot of pushback to, most of the runs should be easy. People are like, no, it should be a little bit more balanced than that and stuff like that. Like, what are you seeing out there now? You're like, there's too much of this cropping up. It shouldn't be this, or something that's changed that we used to think a long time ago that's not the case now.
Probably the biggest thing is the volume. And if you look at, and I'm probably talking more towards the sharper end of things with this, but volume is absolutely massive. For most guys who are competing internationally. Like if you're not running 100-mile a week, the chances of you competing at international level are pretty slim. And that's something that changed, because if you go back to, you often hear, but the golden era of Irish athletics was in the 70s and the 80s, where you had the Eamon Coughlin's and the John Tracy's and the Jerry Kiernans. They were all in 100-mile a week. And we probably got away from that during the 90s. And I know in a lot of the Western countries, there was this drift towards more high intensity with a little bit less, or quite significant less volume. And that didn't work, because if you go back to the late 90s and early 2000s, there was very small presence of European and US athletes and Australian athletes on the circuit in terms of Diamond League and that sort of stuff. That's all changed again now. And if you look at a lot of the guys I know from chatting to some of the lads who would have ran like sort of, Phil Sessamon, who ran 2:08 in Seville 2 weeks ago, he ran 2:08:04, qualified for the Olympics for the UK. Like Phil ran, I think, 130-mile a week for 6 weeks in Kenya before he came back down. And that's not uncommon at the very high level. So in terms of a trend, it's high volume. Now, I'm not advocating everyone here goes out and tries to run 130-mile next week, because
thank God for that.
you have a physiotherapist on next week. But it is, volume is the big thing. And then the other part of it is intensity control. Is just what I described with taking lactates during sessions. It's doing volume, but doing it in a way that's controlled, that's allowing you to do your workout today, give your body a nice stimulus, but come back again and be able to train twice again tomorrow, train twice again the next day, and just, again, stacking that on top of each other over weeks and months. So it's definitely, the volume is the big thing. That's probably the most recent trend. You hear people talking about zone 2. I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit with this zone 1, zone 2 stuff. It's just easy running. Run at a pace where you can have a conversation. Your heart rate's not going too high. You're not accumulating any lactate. It's not particularly difficult. It's very Instagram friendly to make it complex, but it's just go out and have a chat and have a run and get time on your feet.
To do a full circle on this, there was something I saw on Twitter this week, the Kenyan Shuffle, where they were, this is what I want to think on it. And it's for those that don't know, and I didn't know this week, it looks like a very, 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 very slow run. Is there such thing as running too slow, or do they just make it look slow and they're actually going a lot faster? I can't tell. You said zone 1, zone 2 being fancy, but is there literally, because of that mountain mileage, I'm assuming a lot of it has to be very easy. Is there such thing as too easy and wasted mileage, or is miles in the legs miles in the legs?
I'm very much of the opinion miles in the legs are miles in the legs. There's no such thing as too slow. Like those Kenyan shuffles. I mean, the first year I went to Kenya, I went out with a group of athletes for an evening run one night, and they were just doing 40 minutes. They were 9-minute miling. That's 540 per kilometer. And these are athletes who were running like 330 low for 1500. One of them was running 145 for 800 meters. I spent the whole run looking around, like wondering where they were. And I was nowhere close to those times, let me tell you. If it's good enough for these guys to run at 9-minute miling, then I think there's a lesson in that for all of us. Now, they're not running 9-minute miling every day. That Kenyan shuffle thing, again, it's they do a lot of their warm-ups, and they're very easy stuff will be done at sort of 8 to 9-minute miling, so like sort of 5 to 540 per kilometer if you work in Ks. There is a certain amount of it easy. But even, I suppose, if you take it in terms of the race pace, so you're talking about, let's say, the women, top female marathon runners are under 220, right? So that's 520 per mile, 320 per kilometer. They're doing most of their easy runs at probably a minute per kilometer slower than that. So if you put that into context for any runner, whether you're running 3.5 hours, 4 hours, add a minute or maybe a minute and 20 per kilometer onto your marathon pace, and that's where your easy runs should be. And for most people, they'll find they're probably going a little bit quicker than that. I know from doing testing with people over the years, they tend to run too fast on their easy days. And if it's good enough for the best in the world to slow down, then I think it's good enough for all the rest of us as well.
Makes perfect sense to me. Anyway, I'm happy to slow down.
Don't have to tell me twice, Emmett.
Change man straight away.
No, but it is a breath of fresh air, because we've talked about the go slow to go fast, the miles in the legs, all of the different what would you call it, taglines that everyone is using. But the methodology seems to be the same. It seems to be do what's comfortable. Have the awareness to listen to your body and the ability to tell yourself, I need to be able to train tomorrow. Today is not the day. Like it's that ability to keep consistent over the period of time. So whatever tagline it uses, it is still the same.
It's the same message.
It's the same message. Which is the important thing that people need to know. And most of the misconceptions about getting into endurance and running is I couldn't do that. I couldn't. And like people don't realize it's the 1K today and the 1.5K tomorrow and maybe a 4K on Wednesday. That start that gets people, that walk runs, that gets people out the door. All of a sudden, over a 12-week period turns into 6-minute kilometers and 5-minute kilometers before they know it too quickly. It's great that it is a sport that has gotten so complicated, but yet the message is
but it's very simple. And the other thing is, all of us, we're great at looking forward at where we want to be in 6 or 9 months' time. We very rarely look back and see how far you've actually progressed over the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months. Most of us, if we compare, particularly if you're fairly new to the sport, look where you were 6 months ago or maybe 2 years ago, and like you'll have progressed an enormous amount. And I think sometimes we underestimate how much progress we can make because we're not looking back where we came from. We're just looking, if I could take 1 more minute off my 5K, that'd be it. I'd be happy and retire then. And of course, as soon as that happens, you're just thinking, 30 seconds would be nice, wouldn't it?
Just to make it a little bit more complicated before we wrap things up, I want to talk a little bit about the other 10% or 20%, wherever your philosophy is, easy runs and the workout, the different speed sessions. So we've had a lot of different guests to the podcast with a lot of different approaches to this, and all have been very successful. Like we've had people that do pyramid runs for their long runs, so they go like a 6-minute kilometer pace to start, and then a 550, 540, etc. for every kilometer. They get near 410, whatever it is, for their last one, or they try and warm up for 5-10 minutes or whatever it is, and then hit marathon pace, or they'll go intervals on it for a 2-3K at a faster marathon pace, slow it down and build it back up again from that. Do you think that's more of depending on the person, as long as they've got adherence to it and gets them out in training and consistency? Or is there a certain strategy you think benefits maybe one person to the other, or is there an overall better strategy for, in this case, marathon training? I know intervals are coming a lot more for the shorter stuff, but if we're talking just marathon training, do you have a favorite workout, so to speak, I suppose, for the majority of people to do?
So I guess when it comes to I think even before you get to those individual workouts, I think the first thing you need to do with your week when you're training for a marathon is make sure that at least 80% of that week is just easy running. So that stuff that we've talked about, that zone 1, zone 2, heart rate is low, conversational pace. That's the first part. And then of the remaining 10 or 20%, whatever it might be, when you're in the final sort of 6 to 8 weeks before a marathon, I'd be inclined to do it very much at target marathon pace, or where your marathon fitness is dictating you are. So that could be depending on, it could be like, say, some of the elite guys might do like 8 or 9 or even 10 by a mile. But what I do is downsize that to any runner, depending if they're breaking 3 or breaking 4. And instead of doing 10 by a mile, they're doing 10 by 5 minutes. So you're effectively out there for the same duration, and you're working at that marathon type of an effort, or that aerobic threshold type of an effort. So like, it's long workouts. It's doing them specific to where your current fitness is at. And I'd be inclined to, so that's in that last 6 to 8 weeks is just dialing in the efficiency at marathon pace. Prior to that, a lot of it depends on where you're coming from. But I think for most people, prior to that sort of, let's say 8 or 10 weeks, you're looking at 5K, 10K specific stuff. So the workouts in that situation will be very different, and they would depend on the race that you're getting ready for. So it could be track workouts, it could be hills, it could be faster tempo type work. So yeah, there's a whole variety. But one that you mentioned there that I really like is sort of cut down sessions, where you're getting faster as the session goes on. And one that we use in UCD quite a bit is like 15-20 minute warm up. Then we do 15 minutes at marathon pace, 2-minute recovery. We might do 2 by 5 minutes at your lactate threshold pace, or maybe like your 10-mile race pace, off a minute recovery, and then do some really fast stuff towards the end, where it's like 5 by 1 minute fast, 1 minute easy. We just do that on the grass, and it touches on a little bit of all of those systems. You're getting quicker as you go along, and if the athlete is feeling good, it means they can stretch their legs and push on in the last maybe 5 minutes of those 1 minute intervals. But you're not rinsing yourself the whole way through the session, and I think that's ultimately where the important part of any workout comes in, is finish it with the ability to do another 10 or 15% if that was required.
Excellent. Dan there.
I did 10 by 300 at a max effort now, and I'm feeling very bad about myself. Thank you very much there, Emma.
Yeah. Take 2 off it for next week, Eric.
I just have to remind all the other people who are inspired by what you're saying that there are still average people out there. But no, it's absolutely amazing. It's great to hear what you're doing. Are you noticing a change? And I know we're coming up on time, but are you noticing a change now in the student athlete? Are you noticing we said that we shifted away from it in the 90s, and we started to shift back into it. We're now seeing athletes. We're now seeing the David Gillicks. We're seeing our female athletes excelling all the time. Are you seeing a difference in the student athlete getting better, more serious about the sport, athletics being a feasible sport for them to pursue? Or what way are you seeing it now with the student athletes?
So I suppose I've been coaching in UCD for I think 8 or 9 years now. So I've kind of seen a good few iterations of the club, of those guys coming through the club. There's 2 things that stand out. Is first of all, for those who are at a fairly high level, it's becoming a lot more feasible to make an income from the sport in the last couple of years, because there's contracts. The shoe companies are giving out, I won't say lucrative contracts, but they're giving guys a salary that they can actually go and train for the year and not have that financial burden. And I know, going back 15 years ago, that wasn't the case 20 years ago. If you've ever read Rob Heffern's book, Rob obviously was world champion or 50K race walk, and I trained with Rob and are in the same camp as him for time. Like, he got very little support at the time, and that was typical of 15, 20 years ago. It puts a huge financial burden. You're trying to train, but you're also trying to think, where's my next, how am I going to pay my rent? So that bit of it has been taken out. And I think the other thing that's probably we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years is all of the training information is available. So all of the guys coming through UCD, they know what other people and other athletes are doing. So there's a lot of information there. It can be a little bit trickier packaging it and making it appropriate and specific to the athlete, but all of the information is out there. So that is, I suppose, from a point of view of when the athletes come in, and especially if guys are at a sort of decent level at all, they have a good idea of what they need to be doing. And then I suppose it's my job to dial that in a little bit more and usually slow them down a little bit more. But yeah, it's great. Like, there's so much information out there. It's trying to siphon off the bits that are appropriate to you can be the harder part.
So someone's listened to this podcast for the last 45 minutes, and they're hearing about lactate testing, they're hearing about,
and they're still awake.
But everything else that they're hearing about, as like, it's a lot to put together. I want someone to put together for me. Talk to us a little bit what you do at Perfect Pacing.
So I suppose I have a couple of different strands to it. We have our elite group, which we've got about sort of 35 athletes in that. So if you're running close to 13 minutes for 5K, give me a shout. I'd be delighted to talk to you. If it's a case that you're a club runner...
Everyone just stop listening there at the 13-minute 5K. You're on the Any Given Run Day podcast, so you're not the elite Olympic.
Yeah, so I suppose the other side of it then is for I'm completely full in terms of coaching athletes on a one-to-one basis for a club basis. So what I've done last year is we ran a marathon program initially, myself, Evan Lynch and Colin Griffin. We've done a 4-month plan into the Dublin Marathon, and it was all we've done through an app called Final Surge. We've done a call like this every Tuesday night where we went through the week's training, chatted about some aspect of training, and it went really well. So I've kept that going for the last year and a half. So we do blocks every 3 or 4 months. So we've actually got one kicking off on March 11th. I'm not sure when this podcast is going out, but if it's around March 11th, then have a look on the Instagram. And I suppose what we do with those programs is we have a weekly call. So there's half an hour, 40 minutes every Tuesday night we do to guide people through the training, take questions along the way. And then we structure and periodize all of the training. So we pick out races. So like we're picking out the National 10K in Dunboyne in a few weeks' time. We look at a couple of 5Ks in April, May, and then the Dunshaughlin 10K at the end of June is the last target race of this block. So it's very specific races. It gives people good structure in terms of what they're doing. And yeah, there's a little bit of accountability in there, is that the races that we're targeting, people want to perform well when they actually get there as well. So so that's I suppose where I do most of my coaching outside of the club structures and outside of the faster guys.
Well, we'll have all that info anyway in the show notes for you.
Yeah, I was just about to say we'll include that for anyone who's listening. And it's great to see. And again, the beauty about linking in with races is the accountability. No one wants to underperform when the timemanship is actually there for everyone to see. So it's the fear factor and the carrot and the stick all mashed into one. But it's absolutely brilliant. And hopefully those who are listening, you kind of broke up there. March 11th is the next block. And that's going to be kicking off.
March 11th is the next block, and that runs up until the end of June, and then we kick off the marathon program again. So the marathon program runs from the start of July. We target Dublin Marathon, but it covers everything from Berlin up to New York. We kind of tweak it a little bit for people doing other marathons along the way. And if people are interested, like I said, have a look at the Instagram, or you can drop me an email. More than happy to explain it further if anyone is interested.
Absolutely brilliant. Emmett, thank you very much for being on this week's episode of the Any Given Run Day podcast. Now you got a bit of coaching in, so thank you for your time. That is it for myself, Emmett, and Eric. Take care.
Thanks, lads.